Hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm Olly from Simply Stitchy. I'm a full-time blogger and a YouTuber obsessed with sewing. This channel is where I share my passion for sewing through tutorials, how-to hints and sewing tips. I collect and sew from vintage sewing patterns and have an ever-increasing collection of vintage sewing machines. My videos cover the machines, the sewing and the patterns, and sometimes with a little bit of history in there to boot. Today's video is the first in a new series on using sewing patterns, and we're looking at how to make sure you're buying a complete pattern. There are lots of places to get patterns from. You can buy new, where you're pretty much guaranteed to get a complete and unused pattern, which should also be factory folded, but more on what that is in a minute. New patterns can be expensive and they don't always give you the style you're looking for. Second-hand patterns, even some of the vintage ones, can be an affordable alternative, and they can also open doors to styles from the past, which is particularly useful if you're into history bounding. The trouble with second-hand though, it's not always possible to get one that's not used. Bits can be missing. And there's nothing worse than a pattern with a piece missing. Well, maybe perhaps a jigsaw. Missing pieces from a jigsaw can be really irritating. And usually the best way to make sure you've got all your puzzle pieces is to count them. Better still, buy your puzzle new, maybe even mint in box. Patterns don't come in boxes though. They come in what's called sleeves or envelopes. The pattern equivalent to mint in box, or the other describer of something that's new and unused, new with tags, is factory folded. Now factory folded is going to be something that looks like this. I'll show you how to tell that it's definitely factory folded in a minute. Another term that's used to describe a complete pattern is uncut. Sometimes patterns are called uncut, factory folded, which is a bit like saying mint in box, because factory folded is going to be uncut. That's the whole point. It's never been unfolded, so you can't have one that's cut, unless of course somebody's going to take a pair of scissors and cut across that way, which would be a bit silly. Uncut, on the other hand, is normally a pattern that has been opened and refolded, but it hasn't been cut. Take these next examples. Now I'm going to move you in a bit closer so we can take a closer look. If we take a closer look at this one, for instance, we've got Simplicity 2364, and if we open the envelope and take the contents out, you'll see how neat it looks. You've got the instructions and you've got the actual pattern pieces, which look kind of like that. You see how flat they look and compact and pretty much the same size as the instructions. This pattern is factory folded, and I know that because I bought it new and I haven't actually made this one yet, so it's definitely factory folded. If we take a look at this one, now you'll probably recognise this pattern as a pattern that I've mentioned previously. It's actually the pattern that I've made, the green hat that I usually wear in videos. It's Simplicity 5308. Now this pattern, I've used it, okay? So if we take a look at the contents, you'll notice that the instructions are the wrong way round because the cover's upside down, and the pattern pieces are a bit more floofy. They've got a bit of air in between the bits. But this pattern is uncut because I don't cut patterns, and as I've had this pattern from new, I know that it's intact. What I tend to do when I'm using patterns is I'll trace the pieces, and any alterations or cuts I'll do to the tissue paper rather than the actual pattern. So this is a classic example of uncut but not factory folded. So if we just recap on that point for just a minute, factory folded is always uncut. Uncut, on the other hand, isn't always factory folded. Uncut is just the pattern equivalent to new without tags or mint but no box. Now I've got a blog post over on my Simply Stitchy blog, which I'll put a link to in the description box below, which explains why I go to the trouble of tracing pattern pieces instead of cutting the actual pattern, and it also explains why I think it's a practice that you should do too. I mean, one of the reasons is the simple fact that it protects your master copy, so that if you ever wanted to come round to do a pattern again, like I'm going to be with this one as soon as I can remember where I put the fabric, you know that the pattern is in its original state, and if you need to make any alterations you can do it on your carbon copy if you like. Now most of the time when I've used a pattern and refolded it, I can usually get the tissue back to the original lines, as I have done with that one. It's never going to be exactly the same again though. It's never going to be factory folded. I'm never going to be able to get it as flat as this one, for instance, New Look 6446. This is also a pattern I haven't used yet, and it's also factory folded. In a moment we'll go over the signs that you need to watch out for to tell if you've got factory folded, uncut or refolded. But first, if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, now would be a great time to consider doing so. Not only will YouTube let you know when the next video in this pattern series is uploaded, but you'll also get notifications when I upload videos in my other series on how to use electric sewing machines, and the one that I'm still working on, which is how sewing machines have changed from 1912 all the way through to the 1980s. So check out the little subscribe box in the corner of the screen, or down below just above the comments there's a subscribe and a little bell that you need to click to get those little notifications. But let's get back to how to tell if a pattern's factory folded. If we have a look at the factory folded one again, it's flat, it's compact, it's pretty much the same size as the instructions. There's no pattern pieces going outside the rectangle of the pattern, and it looks pretty neat. If we compare that against this one for instance, this is New Look 6355. Just look how thick that is. Now if we take the pattern out of the envelope for a moment, put the envelope back over there, just look how fat that is. You can tell almost without taking a close look at it that this has actually been unfolded and refolded. It's even got the instructions in between all the pieces of tissue paper, which is a classic sign that this pattern is used. And also, I don't know if you're able to pick that up or not, there's some pencil markings where the previous owner has actually made notes on the pattern. Another classic sign that this is not factory folded. Now without opening it up further, I can't tell if it's cut. It actually looks like it's been refolded mostly. There are a few pieces that actually you can tell that somebody's made at least one part of this pattern previously. So this pattern isn't just refolded, it's also cut. If we take a look at this pattern, this is Simplicity R10151. This is a reproduction of a vintage pattern. If we take this out for the moment, you can see that this is a slightly thicker pattern than the ones that we were looking at factory folded over here. The instructions are the right way around. They pretty much match the size of the pattern pieces. If you put those to one side for a moment, take a closer look. The pattern pieces themselves are still nicely compact. They're still relatively equal in size. There's a little bit of a sticky out bit there, but I'm not too worried about that. I actually bought this pattern new as well, so I know it's factory folded. These, I don't know if you can see these properly. You see these telltale little creases? You'll find these a lot on factory folded patterns. What these are, this is where the pattern tissue got caught as it was going through the factory machines that actually fold these patterns. So these creases are normal. You will find them on all factory folded patterns. And one of the things that you can do if you're looking at a pattern that you're not sure is factory folded is see if you can see any of these telltale creases, because what some people do is they'll iron the creases out. One of the easiest ways that you can tell if somebody's trying to sell you a pattern as factory folded when in fact it isn't. That's one of the things that you should be looking out for. Now if we compare this slightly chunkier factory folded to the, oops, hang on a minute, the uncut section of the Simplicity pattern we looked at moments ago, this one's factory folded, this one's refolded. You see the size difference. That's because when this one was unfolded and then refolded, you get air in between the layers of tissue paper and it stops it from actually going back down to the original size, which is why once you've unfolded a pattern, it's never going to be factory folded again. It's always going to be refolded or classed as uncut. Now usually if a pattern is described as being uncut, it's going to have all its pieces, but not always. There have been cases where a pattern has been called uncut when it's actually cut. Worse, the description will say it's factory folded in the listing, but it's cut. I once bought a pattern that was described as uncut. It's been a few years ago now. I opened it up to find the pieces weren't just cut, they weren't there. Only the waste tissue that had been cut out and that was left after the pattern piece had been removed was left. Imagine that. Someone had taken the trouble to refold what was left of the tissue paper. They'd even ironed it flat and popped it on eBay as uncut, which is just wrong. That's like opening a pizza box to find it's just the crust left. It's disappointing and more than a little bit annoying, especially if you've got your heart set on a tangy bit of pepperoni. The thing is, some people will go to great lengths to re-iron patterns to make them look factory folded or even uncut. Why? Because the pattern's worth more if it's complete, particularly if it's a rare vintage pattern from the 1960s or maybe even earlier than that. So how do you know if you've got a complete pattern if you can't trust descriptions, or if you're buying from a charity shop or thrift store, or I think they call them OP stores in Australia? I'm going to show you some telltale signs to watch for, and we're going to start with cut patterns. We're going to start with this little cutie. I picked this one up from a charity shop for about 29 cents, I think it was. Not because it's a pattern for Barbie dolls, but because it says goodbye dollies across the top, which I thought, why? What a strange name for a pattern. This is Butterick 6495. And if we take a look inside, just open it up for a little minute and pop that down there. What we've got is we've got the pattern instructions with the front cover pointing upwards. What we also have is we have little bits of the pattern popping up over the top of the instructions and out at the side. Now if we open it, the instructions up, we'll see that the pattern pieces are enclosed within the instructions and they're also cut. Now this is a classic sign of a cut pattern. Basically they're inside the instructions so that all the pieces stay in one place and they don't go missing. Another incredibly obvious sign that the pattern's cut is any time that you get pattern pieces sticking out at irregular angles like that. That shows that they don't have the complete pattern tissue keeping them in one place anymore. So this pattern obviously is cut. Now I haven't counted the pieces in this one yet to find out if they're all there. The chances are, because they're all cut individually like that, that there may be some missing. So put that to one side for a moment. Okay, we'll move on to the next one. This is Simplicity 6507. This is from the 1960s, I think. If we have a look inside, we've got the pattern instructions, the pictures facing outwards. If we open up the instructions, the pattern pieces are contained inside the instructions, which is an indicator that this pattern is cut. And if you take a look, you'll see that the individual pieces have in fact been cut out from the surrounding tissue paper, because they're all individual. So with both of those, if you're looking to buy them either online or from a charity shop, bear in mind that there may be pieces missing. Now with this one, even before I open the envelope, I know that this one stands a good chance of being cut. And the reason for that is because it's got somebody's name written across it. Now that tells you that whoever owned this before, this Butterick 3907 pattern, they were going to make it for some lucky person called Angela. I'm wondering if they were going to make this one because that's the one that drew my attention to this pattern, because I'm quite keen on making that particular view. But if we take a look inside the pattern, we'll see it's looking a bit messy. You've got bits of pattern sticking out at the top. The instructions are the right way around, which is good. The pattern pieces aren't actually inside the instructions, but if we take a look closely at the pattern itself, you'll see that it's not factory folded. Now the reason why we know that it's not factory folded is because, well, obviously that bit's cut, but even without looking at that bit, it's because you've got these little bits that are sticking out at different angles, and it's not as compact or neat as previous patterns that we've looked at. So that's that one. Oops. Now the tricky bit is getting the vintage patterns back in the packets without actually damaging them any more than they already are, because this one is quite battered. That's a good word for it. It's obviously had a hard life. Okay, moving on. We've got Simplicity, I think that's a 3435. Again, slightly battered. If we take it out, we've got the instruction sheet pointing towards us. We've got unlevel bits of pattern, and we've got individual pieces. So again, we're looking at a cut pattern. I haven't checked this one for completeness either yet. These patterns here are patterns that I've added to my collection of patterns simply because they're from the 1960s, and I like the look of them. Most of the patterns I tend to buy tend to be because I like the artwork on the front. I've got loads of patterns like that. I'm going to leave that there for now. The last one we've got in the cut section, again, Nina was going to be very lucky owner of one of these views. The pattern is slightly coming out over the top of the rest of the pattern pieces. The instructions are kind of the right way around, but again notice that they're actually enclosed inside of the instructions. So again, this pattern is cut and used and in a bit of sorry state of repair. See if I can get that one back in there. Yeah. Okay, the one thing that I forgot to mention, we're back with Simplicity 3435 here. If you've got a pattern that's quite obviously cut like this one, sometimes what you'll see is instead of using plain shears, people will use pinking shears, and that will leave like triangle markings down the side of the pattern. Now factory folded patterns don't tend to come with pinking shear marks, so again that's another sign that the pattern is probably cut with pieces missing. Now they don't always have pieces missing, they might just be cut and put away nicely so that there's nothing missing. Some seamstresses, particularly with patterns from the olden days, were a lot more careful and a lot more considerate about making sure that the pattern pieces all stayed together. But yeah, if it's got pinking shear markings on it, pay particular attention, it might be cut with bits missing. The next couple of patterns we're going to have a look at, this is Simplicity 7627. It's actually the trench coat pattern that I've been intending to make for eldest. She's been waiting quite a while for this one, and I will get around to it at some point. If we have a look at this one, okay, we've got pattern instructions that are the wrong way around. To be factory folded, or to have a chance of being factory folded, they should be like that with the pattern diagrams facing outwards. If we have a look at the actual pieces themselves, they're quite fluffy. In fact, they're very fluffy. They do still have the factory folded creases. They're not quite as straight as most factory folded patterns that you'll see. They've got bits sticking out. And there's a slight evidence going on here about an old fold line that hasn't quite made it back when the pattern was refolded, and that's what this is. This pattern is uncut and it's been refolded, so it's not factory folded anymore. And I know for definite that that's the case with this one because, again, I bought the pattern new and it was me that unfolded it, and I've had a quick look at it to see what the pattern pieces look like and tried to refold it, and I didn't quite get it back into its original lines, which, you know, sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. So that's that one. I'll pop it away in a minute. This one, Simplicity 2414, is instructions are the wrong way around. They should be facing that way for true factory folded. I mean, it doesn't really matter with the instructions if they're the wrong way up or not. What you really need to be factory folded is this bit, but having these the wrong way round does kind of indicate that somebody's had this pattern out of the envelope and it might be a refolded. Now if you take a look at this one, it's not quite lining up properly on the front or the back. Oops. There's a sign here of evidence that it had a previous fold line. So this one is refolded, so this one is uncut, it is not factory folded. Now if we compare that to a factory folded one again for a minute, I'm going to go with this one, which is Simplicity 8517, bought new, so definitely factory folded, it was me that bought it new. Instructions are facing outwards, they're pretty much the same shape as the tissue pieces. If we have a look at the tissue pieces, you'll see that in the main they're nice and flat, there's no puffiness, and they're pretty level. And if you open it up just a little bit, there's no signs anywhere of any previous fold lines, and you've still got the factory folded creases as well. Nobody's had a go at trying to iron any of those out. Now if we have a look at this one, this is Simplicity 3768. And if we take this one out, we've got the diagrams facing the right way. Oh, 2 sheets of instructions, and we've got pattern pieces which look neat. They're a nice oblong shape, not too much sticking out, and they're not in too much of a bad condition, but if you have a look here, you see that? You've got a fold line going down here, which indicates that at some point this pattern was folded along that line, which means that this bit of the pattern at least has actually been used. It's been unopened, it's been opened and then refolded, and it looks as though somebody's ironed it to try and make it look as though that's factory folded. This bit on the other hand, part of the same pattern, is factory folded. So here you've got an example of the differences between factory folded and not factory folded within the same pattern. You've got a little bit of a treat now. These two patterns literally only came this morning. I haven't opened these to find out what condition they're in yet. They were both sold from the same person as used, so I'm expecting them to be cut, and I'm expecting or anticipating that there might be a few pieces missing. But I bought them as used, so I'm not too bothered about that. It was actually the artwork on the pattern covers again that attracted me to these particular patterns. So if you have a look at this one first, Simplicity 6597. It's looking a little bit sorry for itself, but then, you know, it's from the 60s, so you'd expect it to look a little bit beat up. It's got the instructions, they're face up, which is good. It's got the actual pattern pieces, and if we take a quick look at the actual pattern pieces, you remember I was saying a minute ago about using pinking shears. These pieces have been cut using pinking shears, and they've got the telltale little triangles across the pattern pieces, so this pattern is cut. So I'm going to have to check to see if I've got all the pieces for that one, but it is definitely cut. It's not factory folded or unused. This one again, this one's used. You've got the instructions, and you've got the pattern pieces with the telltale pinking shears markings again, so this isn't factory folded. But the interesting thing about this pattern and that one is somebody's taken the time to actually re-iron the pieces to make them look nice and flat, and that's the kind of thing that you need to watch out for. Now the seller for these was perfectly above board. She sold them as used. She couldn't guarantee that all the pieces were here, but some people will iron the pieces flat like that to try and convince you that you're getting factory folded when in fact you're not. Okay, so far we've looked at how to tell if you've got a factory folded pattern against one that's either cut or uncut. It's easy to do in person if you're buying the patterns from, say, your local charity shop or thrift store. But what do you do when you're buying one online? Now the vast majority of online pattern sellers, whether they're selling vintage patterns or brand new ones, are genuine and above board, and the good ones are easy to spot. Their descriptions will be full, informative, and more importantly, they'll be accurate. If they haven't checked the pattern for completeness, they'll say so. If they know it's cut, they'll say so. They want you to be happy. The happier you are, the more likely you'll become a repeat customer. And at the end of the day, this is their business. They sell patterns, so they want you to be as satisfied as possible. And they'll answer your questions, so don't be scared to ask them the questions. If you're unsure of a pattern's condition, ask the seller for pictures of the actual tissue paper. If they dodge, walk away. In all cases when buying online, read that description extra carefully. If it says anything along the lines of looks to be complete, not checked, in used condition, it could well be missing bits. Now there's nothing to say that you still can't buy the pattern. I buy cut patterns all the time. You've just seen a few of them, and mainly it's because I like the artwork on the front. But just be aware that that pattern might not be complete, and make sure the price that you pay for it reflects that. Hopefully these tips will help you in identifying if a pattern is factory folded or uncut a lot easier, so you'll avoid upsetting mistakes. I hope you enjoyed my video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you've got any tips on buying second-hand patterns that I haven't mentioned, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear about your pattern buying adventures too. If you've got any questions, ask me in the comments. I'll try to answer as many as I can, as quickly as I can. If all things sewing is one of your passions, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. why not check out my other videos? Use these useful links here. YouTube recommends this one for you, and I recommend the bottom one. I'm kind of hoping that the boxes have turned up now because I'm just pointing into space otherwise. Whichever video you watch next, I hope to see you back here for my next one. Meanwhile, wherever you're sewing, whatever you're sewing with, embrace your creativity and have fun. Thanks ever so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.